Good evening, my name's Jonathan Mann and welcome to Pulse, Episode 3, Preparation. Thank you to all of you who've tuned in to my last couple of live streams. It's been great to hear your feedback over these past couple of weeks. The first episode was really a general overview of the activities of a conductor's life, and then last week we discussed the rehearsal process, and I've had some really great feedback from some of you who've used some of the things that I mentioned in that live stream about rehearsal technique and how much benefit that has been to your rehearsals recently. So that's wonderful to hear, and I'm really hoping that this evening's chat will be beneficial to you. Pulse effectively is a space for us to reflect on conducting, on music making, and all the little decisions that go into making fantastic performances. So this evening we are going to look at preparation, what that entails for conductors. It takes up probably the biggest chunk of our time as conductors, learning the music and getting ready to actually go in front of the orchestra. So this is a very personal process. I know for myself that throughout my kind of conducting journey to date that my process to conduct has changed so much, and you know, so it's a constantly evolving thing. And I think the question to ask ourselves is, how do you learn? Everybody learns differently, so we have to find a way to learn the music that's going to work for us. So if you don't know how you learn, that's probably the best place to start when you're thinking about how can I prepare my music to the best of my abilities. Are you a visual learner? You know, are you somebody that, you know, if I was to ask you, you know, say if you were conducting Beethoven First Symphony and you had a paper score, you know, with a page on the left and a page on the right, and I said to you, can you tell me, does the second movement of Beethoven's First Symphony in your score, does it start on the right hand page or on the left hand page? If you're a visual learner, you probably would be able to tell me which page it starts on. You might not be able to see every single note and marking on those pages, but generally you process things visually. You might be an auditory learner who, by listening to lectures, by just listening to things, listening to music, you learn that way. You may be a kinesthetic learner who you really do learn by doing it, by getting your hands dirty, by just, you know, you have to kind of get yourself immersed in something to learn. Or you may be somebody who reading and writing is your best way of learning, whatever that is that you're reading, but also writing things down, making plans, making maps. That may be your way of learning. It could be a complete mixture of all four of those things, but it's such a good question to ask yourself, how do I learn? Because then you can kind of set up the way that you're gonna study your music in the best way. So it really is an individual process to study a score, and it will change over time. When I talk about my process and just some ideas of how to prepare music in today's session, you know, maybe there'll be certain scenarios when you have to prepare something very quickly at very short notice. You know, you might be given a call the night before or the morning of a performance or a rehearsal that you have to cover, and you've got such a short period of time to get ready to conduct. There's a different process involved in learning things super fast. So this evening's session is not really focused on how to sort of prepare something for a last minute jump in to conduct. This is very much, you've been invited to conduct somewhere, and you've got a time span that's going to be ample enough time if you're organised enough to learn your music. So time and time management is very important. And again, you need to ask yourself, how do I best learn things? There are some people that like to have that kind of deadline pressure, to learn something, that having that helps them to really learn. But there are other people who like to do things sort of slow and have a slow process. So you need to kind of figure out what's going to be the best way for me, time-wise, to prepare my music. For me personally, it obviously depends on the piece, the actual amount of time I'm able to to spend learning something over many weeks or even months to get ready to conduct. But my process every day is quite similar. I try to keep a similar routine as far as what I do every day. You need to know which time in the day is best for you to learn your scores. Some people who are night owls, they love to study late at night. Everything's quiet, the busyness of the day is done, and it can just be them and their scores, and that's the best time when their mind is alert to work. For me personally, I have to start studying in the morning after I've woken up, I've had my breakfast, everything's happened, the morning routine sort of has kicked in, and then I can just sit down and that's when I study my scores, because that's when I'm at my freshest, my mind is fresh, and by doing that I'm prioritizing it. And I think this is the thing for all of us, that finding the time to study scores, even for people that are full-time conductors, is quite hard actually, unless you make it a priority. Everything in life can get in the way of that time where we go into our study and we open the score and we start work. Whether that's emails and the administration and organising where we have to go, what we have to do in our lives. It can be obviously family pressures, it can be all sorts of things, but making score study a priority, blocking out time every day for it, is so important, because it has to be something you do every day. It has to become a habit, it has to become something that your brain is constantly involved in, so that, because that's the thing about it, is that we need time every day to process the music into our system. And actually, I would like to say how important sleep is for this. That actually so much of the processing of music is done when we're not sitting in our office studying the score. It's done throughout the day when we're doing other things. The music is still internalizing, it's getting into your mind, and also during our sleep the music is being processed in there, and that can be another thing for conductors, is that we know we've got to be ready for this specific date when we have to conduct the piece, and I'm sure most of us feel like we never know the score well enough by the time we arrive at the rehearsal. After a lot of experience now, I kind of know when I'm at a place where, yes, this is in my system, I'm ready to do it. That doesn't mean that I know everything about the piece, and certainly if I could have the chance to have another day or two to look at it, I'm sure I would find out more things about the music, and I'd have more time to learn it and to hear more things. But there comes a point where you do feel, okay, I know this piece now. And that can be a challenge for some conductors, that to have this sort of stress that they never know it well enough. But we have to find a way to sort of find this place in ourselves that, okay, I've got to a place where I do know it. But this is the other aspect to score study. It takes patience. It really takes patience. It's not something that can be rushed. Everybody's learning process is different. You just have to do your study regularly each day, and gradually, by studying every day, going to sleep, letting it process, eventually the music will be inside of you and you will be ready to perform. So welcome if you're joining now. Welcome to the third episode of Pulse. We are talking in general about the score study, the preparation process to conduct. So I'm going to try to give sort of a general overview of my process. I've already talked about making sure it's a priority in your day, knowing what kind of learner you are, because that's really going to help you to really know the best way to learn a score, and also when to study, whether you're a morning person or an evening person, and making it a priority in those times in the day when you know that you're going to be at your best to study. So where to start with score study, I guess? I mean, I could be a bit flippant and say, well, you know, the first thing to do is to take the score and open it. Sometimes that's the hardest part. It can be very overwhelming when you've got a very large, complex masterpiece to actually know where to start sometimes. It obviously depends if it's a piece that you've already heard or you've had some experience with, or if it's like a brand new piece that you this is literally the first time you're coming to it, you don't really know anything about it. But both experiences are very exciting, and that's the thing. Like, people call this preparation process score study, but it's much better if we call it score exploration. That has a much more positive way of thinking than describing it as score study, which in this way, I've got to study, is a little bit negative. Score exploration makes the process more exciting. You know, we are literally going to explore this score and find out all about it, and that's the process when we open it that we're embarking on. That can be an overwhelming feeling, but it also can be extremely exciting. So where to start? You know, obviously you've opened the score. Some people at this point, especially if it's a piece they're not that, whether they don't know it particularly well, they might look for a recording if there possibly is a recording. I mean, pretty much the whole of the standard orchestral repertoire is down on disc. So you're likely to be able to find, numerous different recordings of a piece. So if it is, let's just assume it's a standard orchestral piece, and you don't really know it, the first port of call is probably just to immerse yourself a little bit by listening to it, and listen to many different recordings. If you could listen to like at least more than a couple, different ways of doing it, so that you're not going to be sort of biased to just one way that it sounds. You've heard many different alternate versions, just to give you sort of a little bit into your ears of how the piece sounds at the start of your process. I think that's a great idea. I mean, why not? We're so lucky now at the click of a button to be able to pull up all these recordings and have this amazing resource. Now, but after you've done that, then put the recordings away and come and see what's in the score. And then the journey really does begin. And there's always two questions to ask yourself. Or maybe we could say three questions. The first question is what? What is on the page? What is there in the score? The second question to ask is why is it there? And then after those two questions, the last question is how? So how do we realize this? Yeah? I would say a lot of conductors go to how very, very quickly. They're just want to, as quickly as possible, figure out, how do I move? How do I conduct this? How do I conduct this, you know? But that really should be the very last thing on our minds when we start the process. The other, so hopefully you're able to get rid of that question for at least a little while and focus on the what and the why. Also, too many conductors jump way too quickly to the why question before they've actually really processed what is on the page. It's so difficult to do, and that's why I said earlier on in my sort of talk here that score preparation and score exploration demands us to be patient. This takes time. This takes consistency. And you've got to give yourself enough time to ask the question without trying to make any decisions or rationale. What is on the page? Because that's the first thing, that we have to be able to process everything that's on the page. What is there? Now, if you're coming to a big score, that can be very overwhelming. You know, for those of you that aren't conductors watching this, you know, you might play a musical instrument, you might not, but a single instrument will have one line. But for a conductor, we have many lines. All the instruments we have to have in our score, in our music. So we've got to try and process all of that. We've got to see each line as it goes along horizontally, but at the same time we've also got to process everything that's happening at the same time in the vertical. So it can be quite overwhelming. The more experienced you get in studying scores, the more you can process in one go. But for those of you who are, just trying to figure out, how do I actually get into this without getting overwhelmed, and how do I try to see everything that's on the page? There's quite a nice method. I don't know exactly where this comes from. Maybe somebody can let us know in the comment box. But there's this method called the 8 trips through the score. Some people call it the 7 trips. There could be more than this number of trips through the score. But effectively what it is let's say you have a movement of a symphony. So what you're going to do is you're going to focus in on a specific thing through the music at one time. You're not going to try and look at all sorts of different things at the same time. And the suggested trips through the score, 8 trips, would be these things: instrumentation, text, form, tempo, phrasing, harmony, dynamics, and in that I'll include articulation, and then special interest. And by that I mean things that might be of special interest to that specific piece of music you might be doing. It might be a contemporary piece, or it might be something stylistically to do with, say, the Baroque style or the classical style. So things like that. So what you would do is you would, when you sit down and you open the score, rather than getting completely overwhelmed by every single thing you see at one time, you would say to yourself, right, I'm going to look through this movement now, and I'm just going to focus in on the form. So you would just look at form. That's all you would do. And you get to the end of the movement, you'd figured out all about the form, you've ignored everything else, and you've just processed that information. Then maybe you take a little breather, have a drink, whatever you need to do, have a little break, snack. Then you come back and you say to yourself, right, this time, now I've seen the form, now I'm going to look at the phrase structure. So you would just look at the phrase structure, and you would go all the way through and look at the phrase structure. And by the way, some of these things, if you'd like me to talk in more detail about how I go through and look at phrase structure, or how do I look at form, and how do I mark it on my score, if score marking is something that interests you, please do write a question or a comment in the chat. So this is we're talking about the 8 trips through the score here. So this is what you would do. Rather than getting overwhelmed with every single thing you see on the page, you just choose specifically one thing I'm going to look at. So, for example, text. By that, I mean every written indication in the score. You would go through and notice everything. It might just be a date that's written on the first page. It might be the publisher's name. It might be a word like molto tranquillo. It might be some words that you don't understand at all, and you need to check what it is. Obviously, if it's a vocal piece or piece with a singer, you're going to want to understand the text, know what the meaning is of the text, understand how to say the words, the pronunciation, all of these kind of things. And without music, just absolutely how the text should be sung, should be spoken, and the meaning of that. And that's all you do. We're trying to keep it focused in on this specific thing of text. Then after that, you might want to focus in on harmony. So then that would just be simply just going bar by bar and knowing what the chord structure is, how it's built up bar by bar. So this is a way of processing all the information in the score systematically in a way that is not going to be overwhelming for you. And this really does answer the question of what is on the page. It's so easy to disregard things on the page. And I would say this for myself, sometimes it's really easy for us to take things on the page for granted, especially if it's a piece that you know very well. So for example, the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Okay, it could be quite easy for me just to sort of take this for granted. But if I was to think about the instrumentation on the first page, just in the first da 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 da, this da 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 da, yeah. Okay, so it would be so easy for me to take that for granted because I've conducted it before. I know how it goes. But if I just decide to myself just to take the time to just tell myself who is playing in the first bar of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, I would say clarinets, first violins, second violins, violas, celli, and double bass. Yeah? Now, I could say that and kind of take it for granted, but actually, if you hadn't seen the score and you just heard da 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 da, would you have 100% known that the clarinets were playing? And this is the amazing thing, Then we can ask ourselves, that's what's on the page. Then we can ask ourselves the question, why did Beethoven have clarinets? Because it would be quite possible that if you'd never seen the score, you might hear that first bar and think that only strings were playing if you couldn't see the orchestra. So it's stuff like that we could easily take for granted, but the meaning of the music and the getting to the why question from the what question is this is why it's so important to take the time to see what's on the page. Now, obviously, I'm not going to explain to you, or we don't have time now to go down the route of answering the question of why Beethoven used the clarinets in the first bar. But if any of you'd like to give me your your answers, write a comment. It'd be great to hear from you. And thank you so much for joining. So we're in the middle of this third episode of Pulse, all about preparation. I'm talking generally about preparation. We've covered the fact that it's an individual process. It's important that every conductor knows how they learn best, whether you're a visual learner, an auditory learner, a kinesthetic learner, or somebody that learns by reading and writing, or maybe a mixture of all of those. It's also important to know when is the optimum time in your day to go into your study and work on music. Some people, the best time is first thing in the morning. Other people, the best time is late at night. Other people, any time in between. But you have to know what's best for you, and you need to prioritize it, because this is our job. This is what we've got to do. And we've got to do it every single day. Sleep is so important for the processing of music. So we have to study, we have to sleep. We have to study, sleep, repeat. I need to get this written on my t-shirt. And now I've started to talk a little bit about the process of actually opening the score and how to sort of enter the world of the score. And we've talked a little about this 8 trips of the score, which could be a good way for those of you that get overwhelmed just opening the score and not knowing where to start. This could be quite a good way in. So there's also a very important part of this process of looking at what's on the page. Then we have to connect that with the why question. So why has the composer put it on the page? And this is a personal question, because obviously I can't call Mozart, So this takes your own knowledge, this takes your own experience, this takes all the study that you do. Now, other things that you can do to help you to really learn a score are things that are away from the actual score. So you could look at the orchestral parts. Sometimes just looking at a single part, if you just take the first violin part, for example, that you can learn so much just by seeing the one line completely isolated. Whether that's to do with bowings, it could even be a page turn that they have in their part that could affect the number of players that are able to play the next phrase. It could be something like that you could suddenly realize, by looking at the first violin part. It could be a discrepancy in their part that's not in your score, or vice versa. So there's so much that you can learn from looking at the orchestral parts, the individual parts. You can look at other conductors' scores. On the internet now, there's a wealth of resources that you can find of other conductors' scores. I mean, for example, the New York Philharmonic Archive has most of Leonard Bernstein's marked scores, and it's fascinating to see how other conductors mark their scores, the little things they write in at different places in the music that could make you think about something that you never thought of before, or the way that they maybe solve problems in the pieces that might give you an idea of how you could solve a problem. Obviously, reading books, background reading about the pieces. I mean, there's so many resources out there about different composers, about different pieces, and that has to be done as part of our process. It's not necessarily going to help you to conduct better to know that Brahms composed his Second Symphony in a few months on a summer holiday. But these things, they might affect the way you view the work, So anything that you can find out about a piece of music, about the history of it, about the personality of the composer, about what they were going through in their life, about the historical events that were going on at the time and maybe how that influenced the composer when they wrote the piece. These will all influence your process and your empathy for the work. And of course, other colleagues and orchestral players, you know. Obviously, as conductors, we need to have a very good knowledge of all the instruments in our ensembles. But we're never going to be as good as some of the players who are playing in the orchestra on their instruments. They have the absolute top expertise on these instruments, you know, that we just can't, you know, do that, you know. And sometimes it's so useful just to have a chat with an orchestral player and tell them, oh, you know, I'm doing this piece and there's this trumpet solo. Do you have any, like, how does it feel to play that? Or do you have any advice for me in that passage? What works? You know, what has worked for you in the past? Where do you breathe in this? Or there might be some marking in the score for percussion that you've never seen before. And you want to ask, oh, how do you do this? You know, don't be afraid of asking orchestral players questions like this. They're going to respect you for asking and trying to learn and trying to better yourself, rather than not asking, not knowing, because they're going to find you out. They're going to know that you don't know. And it's much better to find these things out and to be curious. And they have so much experience, especially with the standard orchestral repertoire. The orchestral players have played these pieces probably more times than we have conducted them. And they can offer us so many important facts and just words of wisdom. And then obviously other conducting colleagues, you know, we are so connected now. Conducting is a lonely profession. There's always only one person on the podium. But we're so connected now through the internet that we just at the click of a button, we can write to one another and ask questions. Oh, have you done this piece? How did you do this? What did you do in rehearsal for this? You know, please reach out to me if there's any questions you have about pieces that you're doing at the moment. I'd love to hear from you wherever you are in the world. And then I'd love to have a correspondence with you about the music that I'm conducting and the challenges that I'm finding. That we got to keep this community of conductors growing. It's so good that we have this opportunity over the internet now to share ideas with one another. So you know, this isn't like a massive list of you know, there's so many other ways that you can process the scores. Away from the score as well, if you want to start to internalize the music and to, you know, so much of the learning process of learning a score happens when we're not looking at the score. So for some of you, you might like to make some kind of maps or drawings of the piece. You might want to jot stuff down on your device. For me, you know, sometimes I'll just get my notebook when I'm away from the score and I might write out, you know, some stuff about a piece. So for example here, I've got like the Enigma variations, and like I've written down the theme, I've written down the tempo marking, if there's a metronome marking, you know, and I've just written it down for myself away from the actual score of the Enigma variations. This takes my brain into another place. I'm not like trapped by the score and the notes. I'm free from it, and my mind's starting to work in a different way, and I'm like seeing the variations on the page as I write them down, and it's just freeing my mind, because this is the other aspect, connecting this to what I was saying about last week about rehearsals and the importance of the eyes. We need to find ways to get ourselves away from looking down and conducting, you know, like this at our score. We need to be with our musicians. So any ways you can in your study process that you can actually get away from the score and start to think about the score in your mind and in your body in a different way is really important. internalization is so important. So how can we internalize the score? We can sing it. Singing the score. Obviously you can't sing everything, but just singing it, making it part of you, is super important. Now, whether you do that in your office or whether you go for a walk or a run or a swim, sometimes walking is such a great way for the brain to start working, in a different way. Just the motion of moving just gets the brain working, and that can be a great time to go through a piece of music in your head. Swimming, similar, and you're obviously, when you're walking or when you're swimming, you can't be looking at the score. So there's a different part of your brain and your body that's working to internalize the score in those moments. I highly recommend it. I do a walk every day. It's not for that long, it's about 40 minutes, but it makes a huge difference to me. And as soon as I start walking, the things that need to come to my head come to my head. Now, whether that's me listening to a recording on my walk of a piece that I've been studying, I've been looking at in the score, or it might just be me walking just without any headphones on and the music's there in my mind and I'm going through it. Or I might use my walk for a completely different purpose, whether that's problem solving, something to do with work or to do with family life. Walking is such a great way to get the brain going in a different manner. What else did I write down here? We've got, for those of you that are kinesthetic learners, actually playing the music, playing the score can be important. Whether you play it on the piano, if you're a violinist or a clarinetist, maybe you could play some of the parts on your instrument. That can really help to get the music into your system, to really internalize it. And then obviously recordings. So if we describe the recording process like this, that at the beginning of the process, listening to recordings of the music you're going to conduct, many different recordings if it's something that has been recorded a lot, that's a great thing to do, to just really get the piece in, it's sort of in your system. You've heard it in many different ways. Then we've really gone into the score process and we're starting to hear the piece ourselves and make decisions for how we really want to feel this music played. Then later on in the process, coming back to different recordings, once we've really got a stronger concept for ourselves, coming back to recordings at that point can be really useful to hear how other conductors have solved interpretive problems, some of the challenges that might be faced. Just, can you hear the whole piece now? These kind of things. And you could do that again during your exercise routine. You could do that not at your desk. It's a great idea not to listen to recordings at your desk. Find a different posture to listen to recordings, a more relaxed posture. I mean, go lie down on the sofa, close your eyes and listen to the recording. Don't look at the score and let the recording just wash over you, so that it starts to really internalize and you're using a different part of your brain. Because this is what it's all about. We've got to get the music into our system. We've got to free ourselves from the printed page. So much of the preparation process is looking at the printed page, what's on the page. But at the end of the day, the conductor has to provide an experience to the orchestra and then to the audience where we take the notes off the printed page and we communicate this to the orchestra. What else do we have here? Yeah, and you can ask yourself these questions. What is the meaning of this music? at this point in the process, you know, we've asked ourselves the question, what is on the page and why is it there? But another way of asking that why question is, what is the meaning of this? You know, what was the composer trying to say? What is the meaning? If you can't answer that, I mean, it's really hard. We've just got to be honest with ourselves. We, like I said, we can't call Mozart. But if you can't answer the question, what does the composer mean here? Ask yourself, what does this music mean to me? Make it personal. What is the story? Maybe there isn't an actual story behind the piece, but is there a story? Is there a narrative to you? Because most music has a narrative. It's a story without words, you know? That's the beauty of it, that it can mean something completely different to everybody, even if, you know, the conductor that's sitting next to me sees every single detail and could tell you every single detail just like I could. They get up and they conduct and it sounds completely different because it means something completely different to them. Or their idea of what it means to the composer is different to me. That's the most amazing thing about music and about conducting. So in your process, you should always be asking yourself, what does the music mean to me? Because that is what the orchestra want to know. They want to know what the music means to you. They don't want you to tell them necessarily. Sometimes there's no time. And this is the other thing. I've spoken so much over this past 40 minutes now about all the different things we've got to do to process the score. Everything we've got to know about the score. All the knowledge that we've got to try to take into our system so that we know a piece, right? The thing is that when we actually go in front of the orchestra, the problem for all of us conductors is we've studied the score so much, we've got all these ideas, we've got all this knowledge that we feel that we have to tell the orchestra all our knowledge. We feel like they need to know everything that we've learned in the study process, because if they don't know everything that we've learned, how would they know that we're a really good conductor? But at the end of the day, the orchestra really don't care that you know that chord there is a B-6 chord and the following chord's a diminished chord. You know, they really don't care about that. What they care about is, what does the music mean to me? You know, they want to know what it means, you know, to you. They want to feel that. You don't need to tell them verbally what it means to you, but you need to have figured out what it means to you. And that's why I say, ask that question to yourself. What is the narrative? What's the story going on here? What's the atmosphere? You know, use adjectives, you know, use descriptive language in your process. Some conductors like to write on their scores, you know, a word that can trigger them, you know, for the atmosphere of a piece. It could be something like triumphant in this section. It could be, you know, it could be something really completely random. It could be like some experience that they've had in the past that they just write down on their score, because that experience that they had, it makes them have a certain feeling inside, and then they're able to transmit that to the orchestra. So you've got to find your own way. So for those of you who are joining, welcome to episode 3. I really hope you'll be able to watch some of this back, because I've really tried to explain about the preparation process of how individual this is, that you need to ask yourself, what kind of learner are you? Maybe you're a mixture between the 4 specific types. You might be visual, you might be an auditory learner, you might be a kinesthetic learner, or you might be a reading and writing learner. Also, what's your optimum time of the day for concentration to study? Is it early in the morning? Is it late at night, or something in between? Because that time in the day should be absolutely prioritized if you're a conductor for your preparation process. Nothing should get in the way of that. And patience is required for the preparation process. Unless this is a last minute jump in where you have to learn something to conduct the following day or that night, which happens sometimes, be patient. Regular studying with sleep in between, with exercise in between, to allow the score, allow the music to be processed into your system is much better than some kind of crazy cramming process later on. Because what we want the music to be so in your system that you're free to communicate to your absolute best with the orchestra and to be able to deal with all the other things that are going to be going on during rehearsal. So that, and so then I talked a little bit about the kind of process of opening the score and asking yourself what, then why, and then how. And the danger for conductors is that we open the score and we start asking ourselves, oh, how do we do it? How do we do it? And that really should be the last thing on our minds when we open the score. The first thing to ask ourselves is, what is there? What is on the page? And that takes patience to actually just sit and really look at what's on the page. And that can be quite overwhelming. And then obviously from that question, the next question comes, why is it there? And what's the meaning of that? And what does it mean to you? So once you've kind of built up all of this in your preparation, you should be pretty close to having the music really internalized in your system. And I said earlier on in the session that with more experience, this can be a challenge for conductors, is that we feel like we never know the score well enough, and it can be a stress up to the point of that first rehearsal that we just don't know it well enough. But I think there does come a point with experience where you do know, okay, I'm about to do my first rehearsal with the orchestra and I do know this piece now. Okay, I could, if you gave me another day or two and I could look at the score, there's bound to be more things that I'm going to see in it that I'm going to be able to, take on board and be able to do it better. But, that luxury is not given to us. There has to be a realization at some point that, yes, we know it well enough now that we can go in front of the orchestra. And over time and over experience, you'll all be able to feel that in yourselves if you don't feel it already now. And you just need to learn how to recognize that in yourself, and then to be able to trust that you know it well enough and that you can go in front of the orchestra and conduct that first rehearsal with confidence. And that might take a bit of time to build that into your system. If that's something that you do struggle with, do let me know about that. And also, if there are other things after you've watched this session in full that you feel I could have mentioned about the score preparation process, I'd love to hear from you. But then there's the third part to this that I've tried to leave, and I'm going to talk about this as briefly as possible, because I do feel this is the part of the preparation that conductors focus way too much on, which is the how. How do I do it? And that comes last. How do I physically show this music to the orchestra? And I think that the more experience you've had, it also depends on the piece, if you've conducted it before as well, that the actual physical conducting of a piece, the amount of time you have to spend in your preparation thinking about that becomes less and less the more experienced conductor you get. But that's not to say that the most experienced, the greatest conductors didn't constantly work on their physical communication. I mean, for example, Carlos Kleiber, who would be sort of, lauded as the most amazing physicality of any conductor, you know, just so beautiful and so expressive, and not a single movement that's wasted. Guarantee you he practiced all of those movements. Guarantee it. There's no way that could just be completely free. Obviously, yeah, it would never be exactly the same, but to get that facility takes practice. He would have practiced how to do those movements that could reflect the music in the most musical way possible. So there has to be, for all of us, a time in our preparation given over to thinking about how we're going to physically show the music. And the famous Russian conducting pedagogue Ilya Musin, who taught, you know, generations of unbelievable Russian conductors, used to say that we have to make the music visible. That's really it. All the things that you think about the music, all that study process that you've like looked at the score and you've tried to think about what it means, you know, how do I think about the music, how do I feel about the music, has to be shown physically. In an orchestra, even if they weren't playing and they just watched your movements, should be able to hear the score. One of the most amazing things that we do in the International Conducting Academy is we work in silent conducting, and we might be doing a workshop on, you know, a Beethoven symphony or a Brahms symphony, and we might have, you know, 6 different participants come up and conduct the same excerpt of the same symphony in silence over Zoom, and you can hear a completely different sounding orchestra from every single person that stands up and conducts in silence over Zoom. It's extraordinary, and conductors carry sound. That's what we do. We have to create the illusion of sound with our physicality, and that's what an orchestra responds to. That's why an orchestra sounds completely different with different conductors, is because they're so sensitive to the movements of a conductor, to the feeling that's emanating from a conductor, and that's it. An orchestra does not respond to what it looks like. They respond to how a gesture feels. So because if you go on YouTube and look at an orchestra playing on YouTube, you know, professional orchestra, then they're not looking directly at the conductor. I mean, if you look at me now and I conduct a 4/4 pattern, you know, can you imagine trying to just, I know it's not that clear, but can you imagine actually watching the 4/4 pattern and playing? You know, it's impossible, and it's just tiring. They're responding through their peripheral vision to the feeling of the 4/4 pattern, to the feeling of the movement of the conductor in front of them, to the impulses of the conductor, to the way that the conductor is moving the hands through the air, and that affects how it feels to play, to breathe, you know, to articulate. So this is what we have to practice at home before we go in front of our ensemble. And silent conducting is an amazing way to do that, you know? Because and I would caution against those of you that like to conduct along to recordings, because the problem with that is when you conduct along to a recording, you're following the recording. So the problem will be when you have to go in front of a live ensemble, you can't follow a live ensemble. You have to lead the ensemble. So that's why I would caution any of you that are practicing conducting with recordings that it's not really the ideal way. I talked earlier in the session about how vital and how useful recordings are in our study process, in our preparation process. But at this point, when you're having to actually practice the physicality of conducting, recordings are not going to be your friend. I would even caution against too much conducting in the mirror, because part of your brain is being used to look in the mirror and analyze what you're doing in real time. When you're in front of an ensemble, unless you're lucky enough on that occasion to be rehearsing in a dance studio where the wall that you're looking at has a mirror, there's no mirror. There's just people in front of you. So like an elite athlete would prepare for a race, for example, like 100-meter runner, they can't run the 100 meters continuously all day long to practice. They have to visualize the race. They have to visualize how it's going to feel to walk to those blocks, hear the sound of the gun, and then go down that track, and how it feels to come out of the blocks, how it feels to get the run in motion, and how it feels when there's people either side of you and you can hear the sound of the feet and the breathing and all of that. And they imagine how it would feel to run the perfect race. In a way, for conductors, we have to also visualize the orchestra. We have to have that imaginary orchestra. We have to visualize, where is the timpanist sitting? Where's the back of the cellos? Where is the first trumpet sitting? In our room, we can do this. We don't need an orchestra to do this. We just need our imagination. And then, how does it feel to give the upbeat? And who do we need to be with? And we can do all of that. We can visualize the piece. We can visualize how it will feel, and we can even hear the response potentially of how they play back to us with what we show. And then we can video ourselves. So rather than using the mirror, we've got these amazing devices now to video ourselves. So this is sometimes what I will do. I will practice conducting in silence, where I'll video myself, and then I'll look back on the video, and I'll try to hear the music. I'll try to hear the piece and ask myself the question: did that work? Is that the sound that I'm after? What little bad habits am I doing? Am I standing good? Is my posture good? Am I overusing my left hand in a way that's not helpful? Did I give enough space in the breath for that low horn note that's so low that if I don't give a big enough breath, that it's going to be hard for them to play that note? Or is the look I gave in that gesture going to cause a trumpet player to split a note? There's so many things that you can analyze through conducting in silence, videoing yourself. So this is really the three sort of stages of the study process. Again, it goes back to my motto that I mentioned in episode 1 of Pulse: head, heart, and hands. The first step of the process of preparation is everything that we think about the music, everything that we see in the score, what is on the page. Then we have to connect it with what it feels like, what it means to us. Why is it on the page? Why did the composer put it on the page? Is there a narrative? What did the composer mean when they put this on the page? And then obviously we got the hands, we got the physicality. So once we've built up this picture of what we think about the music, what we feel about the music, then we've got to find a way in our preparation process to realize it with our physicality. And I'll go back just to the beginning of my talk, just to remind everybody that it's super important, if you're preparing to conduct, to know what kind of learner you are. Are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? Are you a kinesthetic learner, or are you somebody that learns by reading and writing? Because if you know which of those is your strongest point, or maybe it's a mixture of those, you can find the tools that are going to help you to prepare in the best way. Also, what time in the day is going to be your optimum time to study and to learn? I'm going to not say the word study because that's negative. What time in the day is best for you to explore? Because exploration is the heart of what we do as conductors. We have the privilege of exploring these masterpieces. And if you know what your optimum time in the day is to explore the score, that has to be your number one priority. Nothing should get in the way of that time every single day. Even if it was just a couple of hours, those hours should be sacred for your preparation time. And then the last thing to say is this takes patience. It takes patience to do this every day, to sleep and do it again, to go for a walk or a swim or do whatever exercise you do and let the music go into your system when you're not looking at the score. Go to sleep, come back to your study and continue. It takes patience to ask yourself what is on the page. Not to jump straight to why and how, but what is on the page. Preparation takes patience. But when you've prepared well, it is such a joy to go and stand in front of an ensemble. You don't even need to share verbally all of this journey that you've been on during your preparation process. Simply by standing there, having the score in your head and your being, not your head in the score, and just being there, being able to communicate with the musicians. They will know that you know. That's the thing. They will know that you know. You don't need to prove anything if you've done your preparation right. So I hope you've enjoyed it, listening to this today. I've loved sharing some of these ideas with you. In the coming week, I'm going to do 2 live streams actually. We're going to do a special one on Friday, which is going to be, actually not this Friday, it's going to be a week Friday, which is going to be actually live in a masterclass where I'll be teaching some of my students. So you'll get a real insight into how I think and work with my students when I'm doing that side of my activities. But next Sunday we'll be back at the same time, 8 p.m. British time. And I think that the best thing for us to do would be to try to take some of the concepts that I've mentioned today and look at a specific piece of music and see how these things can be explored with that. So the options are still out there. At the moment, the options are between Brahms' Second Symphony and Rimsky-Korsakov Scheherazade. So I've already had quite a few people voting in a poll that I put out earlier in the week. And at the moment, the winner currently is Scheherazade. But please let me know which one of those pieces you'd be interested in me kind of delving deeper into, because I think next Sunday, 8 p.m. British time, we will really look at one of those in detail and take some of the things that I've talked about today into that session. So thanks everybody so much for joining me. Send me a comment, send me a message. It's really wonderful to see you guys listening into this session. Wishing you all a wonderful week, and to any of you that are, a very happy Father's Day. This is me tuning out now. Take care. Bye bye.